A gentle night breeze blew softly through the windows of the townhouse in Mystic Grove, carrying with it the scent of the mountains and the whisper of ancient trees. Helen Myers adjusted the blankets on her son's bed for the third time, a ritual she long knew was futile. Her fingers caressed the dark hair of Caleb Myers, who pretended to sleep with a mastery worthy of the finest actors. "Good night, my love," she whispered, knowing that in a few hours the bed would be empty. Once again. At 15, Caleb was an enigma that even his parents couldn't decipher. Blind since birth, the boy had developed an independence that defied all logic. During the day, he was an ordinary teenager, attending regular school and spending time with his friends. But at night he transformed into something else entirely, as if responding to a call that only he could hear. Helen closed the bedroom door and descended the creaking wooden stairs. In the living room, she found Anthony Myers sitting in his favorite armchair, his reading glasses balanced on the tip of his nose as he pretended to read a book. The couple exchanged a tired look laden with worry. "He's going out again," Anthony murmured, closing the book without marking his page. "As always," replied Helen as she sat on the arm of the chair. "We've tried everything, Anthony. Window bars, alarms, even locking his bedroom door. He always finds a way." What was most intriguing wasn't just that Caleb managed to slip away. It was how he navigated both the town and the dense forest surrounding Mystic Grove without so much as a scratch. The uneven stone streets and rugged trails posed no obstacle for him. "Last week, I ran into Mrs. Marcy at the bakery," Helen commented, her restless hands smoothing the fabric of the chair. She swore she saw Caleb walking along the Vale, Falls Trail at 3 in the morning, as if he were being guided by someone, and yet he was alone. Anthony removed his glasses and massaged his temples. The stories of Caleb's nocturnal wanderings were multiplying throughout town. Some said the boy talked with the trees, others insisted that animals followed him, like he was a modern-day Pied Piper. At 10 o'clock that evening, the couple went up to their bedroom as part of their nightly routine, pretend to sleep and wait for the inevitable. Around midnight, the nearly imperceptible sound of footsteps in the hallway signaled that Caleb was on the move. Helen squeezed Anthony's hand beneath the covers, fighting the urge to rise and follow their son. They had tried that before, only to find that Caleb seemed to have a sixth sense. Whenever they attempted to track him, he changed direction, disappeared along impossible paths, or simply seemed to vanish into thin air. From the bedroom window, they watched Caleb's silhouette cross the garden. The full moon bathed everything in silvery light, and for a moment Helen could have sworn she saw a bluish glow around her son. He walked with supernatural confidence, deftly avoiding rose bushes and potted plants, as if he could see them perfectly. "There's something different." "Tonight," Anthony murmured, his body tense beside his wife. He was right. The air felt denser, charged with a strange energy. The garden's shadows danced unusually, and a warm wind blew toward the forest, as if guiding Caleb to an unknown destiny. As soon as Caleb reached the edge of the garden, where thicker vegetation began, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was an elderly woman with white hair and a colorful shawl, as though she had sprung from the darkness itself. Mrs. Iris, the mysterious resident of the house near the forest, stood there as if waiting for him. A chill ran down Helen's spine as she saw the old woman extend her hand toward her son. Even more surprising was Caleb's natural acceptance of the gesture, as if that encounter were an age-old ritual. "Anthony," Helen whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you seeing this?" Before Anthony could reply, Caleb and Mrs. Iris had already disappeared into the darkness of the forest, leaving only the echo of a whisper that seemed to come from the trees themselves. The couple remained at the window, struggling to process what they had witnessed. That night, something had changed. The mystery of Caleb's nightly escapades had just gained a new character, and with it, the certainty that there was far more to this story than they could ever imagine. The legends surrounding Mystic Grove, long dismissed as mere local folklore, were beginning to take on an unmistakably real form. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. At dawn, Helen and Anthony sat in the kitchen with their untouched coffee cups. Neither had managed to sleep after the scene they had witnessed. the image of their son disappearing into the forest with Mrs. Iris still burned in their retinas. "We need to talk to her," Anthony decided in a hoarse voice from a sleepless night. "We can't pretend this is normal anymore." Helen nodded, wrapping her hands around a cold coffee cup. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation. Caleb entered the kitchen with his usual serene smile, as if he'd slept the entire night in his own bed. "Good morning," he greeted, moving purposefully toward the refrigerator. His movements were fluid and assured as always. "Son?" Helen began, exchanging a quick glance with Anthony. "We need to discuss your nighttime outings." Caleb paused, his hand still on the refrigerator door. His youthful face took on an expression mixing concern with something more. Wisdom, perhaps. A strange look for someone so young. "You saw me with Mrs. Iris," he stated matter-of-factly. The silence that followed was broken by a knock at the door. Helen rose to answer it, inwardly grateful for the interruption. But the arrival of the visitors would add even more mystery to an already extraordinary morning. On the doorstep stood a man and a woman, both dressed formally despite the rising heat. The man, who appeared to be about 50, offered a calculated smile beneath his gold-rimmed glasses. "Good morning," he said, extending a business card. "I'm Dr. Gus Peckham from the Prometheus Institute, and this is my colleague, Dr. Marina Voss." Helen took the card mechanically, an inexplicable discomfort rising within her. The woman beside Dr. Peckham smiled gently, her green eyes studying the interior of the house with barely concealed interest. "Actually," Dr. Marina said in a soft, melodious voice, "we are particularly interested in the unique properties of the forest surrounding Mystic Grove. Some locals have mentioned interesting events." At that very moment, as if in response to her words, a strong wind burst through the open door, scattering papers and making the curtains dance. In the kitchen, Caleb abruptly turned toward the visitors, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. "Please, come in," Anthony offered, more out of courtesy than genuine invitation. Something in the air had changed since the researchers arrived, as if the house itself were on high alert. As the visitors settled in the living room, Helen noticed that Dr. Marina kept her eyes fixed on Caleb, who lingered at the threshold of the kitchen. There was something predatory in that gaze that sent every maternal alarm ringing. "We have records of significant energy anomalies in this region," explained Dr. Peckham, retrieving a tablet from his folder, "especially at night. The patterns are fascinating." He turned the screen to display graphs and thermal maps of the area. The images showed clusters of intense light concentrated in the forest, like terrestrial constellations. Helen's heart raced when she noticed several of these points coincided with Caleb's usual paths. "Have you noticed anything unusual?" Dr. Marina asked, her green eyes once again fixed on Caleb. "Changes in the vegetation, odd animal behavior, inexplicable lights?" Before anyone could answer, another gust of wind swept through the room, stronger than the previous one. The leaves on the potted plants trembled, and for a moment Helen thought she heard a whisper, as if the plants themselves were conversing. "No," Anthony said firmly, rising from his seat. "I'm sorry, but we can't help." Dr. Peckham smiled, though his smile failed to reach his eyes. "Of course we understand, but we'll be in town for a while, in case you remember anything relevant." He placed another business card on the coffee table. When the researchers departed, the air in the house seemed to lighten. Helen closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. Caleb remained where he was, his expression now grave. "They must not know," he suddenly said, his voice more mature than ever. "They must not know about the forest." "What is it they must not know, son?" Helen asked as she moved closer. "What is happening?" Caleb turned his face toward the window as if he could see through it. "We need to talk to Mrs. Iris," he replied. "She'll explain everything. But it has to be before dusk. Things are changing too fast." Anthony and Helen exchanged worried glances. The arrival of the Prometheus Institute seemed to have accelerated something already in motion. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to shift, forming a picture they still couldn't comprehend. Mrs. Iris's house appeared to sprout from the forest itself. Vines covered its stone walls, and the garden was a labyrinth of herbs and flowers exuding mysterious aromas. Helen, Anthony, and Caleb followed the narrow path that wound through lush flower beds, where butterflies danced in a hypnotic choreography. Before they could knock, the carved wooden door opened. Mrs. Iris stood in the doorway as if expecting them. Her white hair was braided with colourful ribbons, and her dark eyes shone with ancient wisdom. "Finally," she said in a husky, melodious voice, "time is running out." Inside, the house was a unique space where nature and home blended seamlessly. Plants grew in hanging pots, their leaves forming a living canopy overhead. The air was rich with the aroma of dried herbs bundled from the ceiling. "You have questions," Mrs. Iris continued, guiding them into a circular room where colourful cushions were arranged on the floor. "But first you must understand what is at stake." Caleb moved about the space with familiarity, settling on a blue cushion as if it were his usual spot. His parents followed, still uneasy about the situation. "Why our son?" Helen asked, her voice trembling. "Why can he do what he does?" Mrs. Iris poured tea into rustic ceramic cups. The liquid glowed with a soft greenish light. "Caleb is not blind in the way you think," she explained. "He sees through the vital energy that flows in all things. It is a rare gift, one that appears only in a few generations." "Vital energy?" Anthony questioned skeptically. In response, Mrs. Iris snapped her fingers. At that very moment, every plant in the room began to glow softly, their light patterns dancing along the walls. Caleb smiled and reached out to touch the luminous beams visible only to him. "The forest is alive in a way few understand," she continued. "It has its own consciousness, its own memory, and now it has chosen Caleb." Helen squeezed Anthony's hand tightly. "Chosen for what?" "To protect it," Caleb replied, surprising his parents. "I can feel, Mom, every tree, every leaf, every creature. It's as if they are extensions of my own body." Mrs. Iris nodded, her eyes alight with approval. "The forest is in danger. Those researchers, they are not what they seem. The Prometheus Institute has been tracking leads all over the country, searching for sites of power like this." "But what exactly do they want?" Anthony asked. Before Mrs. Iris could answer, a strong wind burst into the room, rustling the curtains, hand-setting the plants, whispering. Caleb suddenly stood, his face fixed on the window. "They're here," he said urgently, "in the forest." Mrs. Iris moved quickly to the window. In the distance, silhouettes moved among the trees, figures equipped with devices emitting flashing lights. "The Institute works fast," she murmured, "but they still don't know exactly what they're after. We need to buy time." "Time for what?" Helen asked, as she rose to stand beside her son. "Time for Caleb to complete his training," the Guardian replied firmly. "He must learn to control his gifts before—" She paused abruptly, as if she'd said too much. "Before what?" Anthony insisted. "Before the forest reveals its greatest secret," Caleb completed in a distant, trance-like tone. "It shows me in dreams, something ancient, something powerful, buried deep within the earth." Mrs. Iris placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Caleb's gift isn't accidental. The forest chose him because it knew this moment would come. The Prometheus Institute may have advanced equipment, but they do not understand the true nature of what they seek." A metallic sound echoed from the forest, followed by a piercing noise that made everyone shudder, everyone except Caleb, who remained calm. "That's their equipment," he explained. "They're trying to map the forest's energy lines." "And succeeding," Mrs. Iris added tensely. "We must act quickly. Caleb needs to begin his training tonight." "But it's dangerous," Helen protested. "With them out there—" "More dangerous would be if he were unprepared," the Guardian replied firmly. "The forest will protect him as it always has. But now he must learn to protect it in return." The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange. Shadows stretched across the floor of the house, and the air vibrated with an ancient, mysterious energy. Caleb turned to his parents, his youthful face now marked with surprising determination. "Trust me," he pleaded. "I know what I must do." At the makeshift base of the Prometheus Institute, set up in a small guest house on the outskirts of Mystic Grove, Dr. Gus Peckham studied the equipment readings with mounting excitement. Computer screens displayed energy patterns never before, recorded, forming a complex web that extended throughout the forest. "It's extraordinary," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "The energy not only flows, it pulses, as if it were alive." Dr. Marina Voss examined the data with equal intensity, though her focus was on another aspect of the investigation. "The boy is the key," she said, spreading photographs across the table. These were thermal images taken at night showing a human figure enveloped in a unique energy field. "He moves through these energy fields as if they were extensions of his own body." "We need to bring him to the Institute," declared Dr. Peckham. "Imagine what we could learn, the potential applications." "He's just a child, Gus," Marina interjected, worry lacing her voice. "A child with a unique connection to one of the greatest energy phenomena we've ever documented," he retorted, his tone obsessive. "Think of the possibilities. If we can understand and replicate this energy—" "Like the previous attempts," Marina interrupted, her voice heavy with concern. "We're still facing legal issues from our last experiments." Peckham waved off her concern with a dismissive gesture. "This time it's different. We have concrete evidence. And that old lady, Mrs. Iris, she knows more than she lets on. We need to monitor her too." Meanwhile, deep within the forest, Caleb began his training under Mrs. Iris's guidance. The night was clear, illuminated by a crescent moon that poured silvery light through the treetops. "Close your eyes," instructed Mrs. Iris, though she knew it mattered little to Caleb. "Feel the flow of energy. It is in everything, in the trees, in the stones, even in the air." Caleb took a deep breath, letting his senses expand. To him, the forest was a kaleidoscope of energies, each living thing emitting its own luminous signature. The ancient trees shone like beacons, their roots forming a network of light beneath his feet. "Now," Mrs. Iris continued, "try to channel the flow." Concentrating, Caleb extended his hands. The energy around him responded, causing the leaves of nearby trees to dance even without a breeze. Small animals emerged from the shadows, drawn by the manifestation of his power. "Impressive," murmured Mrs. Iris. "You learn quickly." A branch snapped in the darkness, freezing them both. A few meters away, hidden behind an ancient tree, one of the Prometheus Institute's assistants filmed the scene with a state-of-the-art thermal camera. Unbeknownst to him, roots began to shift beneath his feet, silently snaking through the damp earth. When he tried to move, he found himself momentarily trapped. "The forest protects us," said Mrs. Iris calmly. "But we must be more cautious. They are everywhere now." Caleb nodded, sensing the presence of additional electronic devices scattered throughout the woods. "They're searching for something specific," he said. "I can feel it in the vibrations of their equipment, as if they know there's something special here." "The eye of the forest calls to them," Mrs. Iris whispered. "Even without knowing what it is, they can sense its power. That's why we must hurry with your training." Back at the Institute, the computers began registering a growing anomaly. Energy levels were intensifying, concentrating at a specific point in the forest. "It's happening again," exclaimed Dr. Peckham, eyes fixed on the screens. "Marina, call the team. We need to triangulate the source of this phenomenon." But Marina remained silent, her mind sifting through all the data. Something didn't feel right. The local stories, the energy patterns, the boy's connection with the forest, everything pointed to something far greater and older than mere scientific anomalies. "Perhaps," she said hesitantly, "we should consider that some things are not meant to be studied in a lab." Peckham shot her an irritated look. "Don't tell me you're starting to believe in local superstitions." "They're not superstitions," she replied firmly. "It's something more, something we might need to respect rather than control." In the forest, Caleb continued his training, growing ever more aware of the power flowing through him. The trees whispered, ancient secrets in his ears, gradually revealing the true nature of his mission. A week passed since the beginning of his training, and Mystic Grove had changed. The town's air grew heavier, laden with an inexplicable tension. Prometheus Institute teams were seen everywhere, installing equipment and taking measurements. At the Myers home, Helen watched through the kitchen window as a new Prometheus van parked on the street. Her fingers drummed nervously on a cold coffee cup as anxiety mounted. "They're getting closer," Anthony said as he entered the kitchen, his dark circles a testament to sleepless nights. "Last night, I saw strange lights near Mrs. Iris's house." Upstairs, Caleb lay in his bed, his body exhausted from his nightly training, but his mind sharper than ever. Through his unique perception, he sensed the changes in the forest. The network of vital energy was growing more intense, more concentrated, as if responding to an ancient call. At the Prometheus Institute base, Dr. Peckham analyzed the latest data with mounting obsession. The walls were covered in maps and graphs, a mosaic of information that only he seemed to fully grasp. "The patterns are converging," he explained to his team. "All the forest's energy is funneling toward a single point. And look here." He projected a series of images onto the screen. "These readings are identical to those found at ancient archaeological sites." Dr. Marina frowned as she studied the images. "Gus, I found something in the town's historical archives." She opened an old folder, its pages yellowed with time. "There are accounts of an artifact, something the natives called the all-seeing eye. They said it was the source of the forest's life." "An object with unique energetic properties," murmured Peckham, his eyes gleaming. "Imagine the potential. We must find it before that old lady and the boy interfere." Back at Mrs. Iris's house, Caleb attended another training session. Mrs. Iris had arranged a circle of crystals in the center of the room, each stone pulsing with its own energy. "Focus," she instructed. "The eye of the forest is awakening. Can you feel it?" Caleb nodded, placing his hands over the crystals. Under his touch, the stones glowed more intensely, creating dancing light patterns on the walls. "It's like a beating heart," he described. "It calls out, not only to me, but to everyone who can feel it." "The Institute can sense." "It too," Mrs. Iris confirmed, her voice heavy with concern. "They have sophisticated equipment, but they do not truly understand what they seek. The eye of the forest isn't merely a power object, it is the very essence of this place." A distant rumble made the windows tremble, though the sky remained clear. Caleb abruptly stood, his face tense. "Something's wrong," he said. "The forest, it's agitated." Mrs. Iris rushed to the window. In the distance, strange lights flickered among the trees. The Institute had begun a nighttime operation. "They've found something," she murmured. "We must act now." In the heart of the forest, Dr. Peckham's team had discovered an ancient rock formation covered in mysterious symbols that glowed subtly under their equipment's light. "This is it," he declared, running his hand over the inscriptions. "All the energy patterns converge here," Marina observed with growing apprehension. The symbols pulsed as if responding to human touch. The air around them buzzed with static. "Gus," she called, her voice trembling, "perhaps we should—" "Wait, perform more analyses before—" "Wait," he interrupted nervously. "We're on the brink of the greatest scientific discovery of the century. There's no time for caution." While the Institute team prepared their devices, Caleb and Mrs. Iris moved silently through the forest. Never before had the boy felt the forest's energy so keenly. Every tree, every leaf seemed to vibrate with purpose. "They cannot open the sacred site," Mrs. Iris whispered. "They aren't prepared for what they will find." Caleb felt the eye of the forest pulsing beneath his feet, calling him stronger with every step. The moment of truth was approaching, along with a choice that would change everything forever. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. Moonlight filtered through the treetops, casting dancing shadows on the forest floor. Dr. Peckham and his team had set up a perimeter around the rock formation, installing powerful floodlights that bathed the area in a cold, artificial glow. The contrast between natural and artificial light created a surreal scene, as if two worlds were colliding. "The energy levels are skyrocketing," announced one technician, eyes glued to a portable monitor. "I've never seen anything like this." Marina roamed the area, photographing the ancient symbols etched into the rocks. Each flash of her camera seemed to awaken a new glow in the inscriptions, as if the stone itself were responding. "Gus," she called, approaching the expedition leader. "I've managed to translate part of the symbols. They speak of a pact, a promise made long ago between the forest and its guardians. Superstitions, dismissed Peckham, adjusting his instruments. What we have here is an untapped energy source, possibly the key to a new technological era. A few meters away, hidden in the shadows, Caleb and Mrs. Iris watched the commotion. The boy sensed the growing agitation in the forest, as if every tree and creature were on high alert. "The eye is reacting to their presence," Caleb whispered, his hands touching the damp ground. "It's almost frightened." Mrs. Iris nodded gravely. "The artifact isn't just a power object, Caleb. It's the heart of this forest, the link between the natural and the spiritual. If they disturb it—" Her words were cut short by a sharp metallic sound. The Institute team had begun using a deep scanning device, sending energy waves through the soil. The effect was immediate. A tremor rippled through the earth, making the leaves shudder. In the center of the clearing, the symbols on the rocks began pulsating with their own light, growing ever more intense. "It's working!" exclaimed Peckham, his voice charged with excitement. "Increase the power!" Marina stepped back, alarmed. "Something isn't right," she murmured. "The energy, it's out of control." From his hiding place, Caleb felt the forest's pain, as if each wave from the Institute's devices was tearing through the delicate fabric connecting all living things. Without hesitation, he rose. "Caleb, no," Mrs. Iris cried, trying to hold him back, but it was too late. The boy strode toward the clearing, his steps firm and determined. The floodlights illuminated him, revealing his presence to the entire Institute team. "Stop!" His voice rang out, stronger and more mature than ever. "You don't know what you're doing." Dr. Peckham turned, a triumphant smile on his face. "Ah, our young prodigy. Come see what we've discovered. You, more than anyone, should appreciate the magnitude of this discovery." But Caleb remained rooted to the spot, his blind eyes fixed on something beyond the human commotion. "The forest isn't a laboratory," he declared. "The eye is not an energy source to be exploited. It's a guardian, just like me." At his words, the glow of the symbols intensified and a deep vibration emanated from the ground. Marina, closest to the rocks, felt an intense heat radiate from the inscriptions. "Gus," she urgently called, "we need to shut down the equipment. Now." But Peckham was beyond reason. "No, we're so close, a little more power and—" A piercing sound cut through the air, like a crystal shattering. In the center of the clearing, a fissure opened in the ground, emitting a golden light that outshone even the powerful floodlights. "What's happening?" shouted one technician as he recoiled. Caleb stepped forward, and all the forest's animals, birds, small mammals, even insects, seemed to rally around him, forming a protective circle. "Now you'll see," he said, his voice blending with the rising wind, "the true power of the forest." The golden light from the fissure transformed night into day. The air vibrated with ancient energy, and the Institute's equipment began to overload, their screens flickering with impossible readings. Helen and Anthony, who had followed Caleb into the forest, arrived at the clearing. They stood paralyzed before the surreal scene, their son, encircled by his own luminous aura, standing before a glowing fissure in the ground where the very life of the forest seemed to converge. "Caleb!" Helen cried, trying to advance, but Mrs. Iris held her back. "Wait," the Guardian said. "He knows what he's doing." Dr. Peckham watched with a mix of fascination and obsession. "Extraordinary," he exclaimed, frantically adjusting his instruments. "The energy is beyond any known scale." Marina, however, had retreated to the edge of the clearing. Years of scientific study had not prepared her for what she now witnessed. The symbols on the rocks moved and shifted as if alive, and the air was thick with whispers in an ancient, forgotten language. Caleb stepped further toward the luminous fissure. Underfoot, roots and vines shifted like living serpents, naturally, forming a path. When he spoke, his voice carried the echo of thousands of years. "The eye of the forest is not an object to be studied or controlled," he declared. "It is the living consciousness of this place, the guardian of the balance between all beings." As if answering his words, the fissure widened, and from it emerged an object that defied comprehension. A crystalline sphere, about the size of an orange, pulsating with impossible colors, and seemingly containing a miniature universe within. "No!" shouted Peckham, advancing with a containment device. "We can't let this opportunity slip away. Imagine what we could do with this power." Before he could reach it, the trees themselves reacted. Branches moved like giant arms, forming a natural barrier. The wind intensified, swirling into a vortex that encircled the clearing. Caleb extended his hands, and the eye of the forest floated toward him, hovering just inches above his palms. At the moment of contact, a surge of energy swept through the area. Every person present was struck by vivid visions. They saw the forest through the ages, witnessed the birth and growth of each tree, and felt the profound connection between all forms of life. Marina fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Gus!" she called, her voice choked. "We cannot interfere with this. It's bigger than us." But Peckham was beyond reason. In a desperate act, he activated all his equipment at maximum power, trying to capture that extraordinary energy. It was his fatal error. The devices overloaded instantly, exploding in a cascade of sparks. The eye of the forest pulsed even more, intensely, and Caleb, understanding what must be done, pressed the artifact against his chest. A blinding light enveloped him, and for a moment he seemed to merge with the forest itself. Every tree, every leaf, every living thing shone with the same golden light. The power of the eye flowed through him, not as a force to be controlled, but as a harmonious dance between guardian and protected. "This is as it should be," Mrs. Iris said, her voice thick with emotion. "The guardian and the guarded, becoming one." Helen and Anthony watched in awe as their son, whom they had always considered limited by his blindness, revealed himself as something far beyond human understanding. He was not merely a boy who could see the forest's energy. He was part of it, its chosen protector, the link between two worlds. Faced with the overwhelming power before them, the Institute team began to retreat. Their equipment was rendered useless, their science inadequate to comprehend what was unfolding. Peckham, watching his dream of scientific discovery crumble, sank to his knees in defeat. Dawn arrived in Mystic Grove, bringing a peace the townspeople had never experienced before. The forest seemed more alive, more vibrant, as if every leaf and flower celebrated a new era. At the Myers home, Helen prepared breakfast while Anthony set the table, both still processing the extraordinary events of the previous night. Upstairs, Caleb slept deeply for the first time in weeks, the eye of the forest now part of him, not as a separate object, but as an extension of his very being. "I still can't believe it," Helen murmured, placing a cup on the table. "Our son?" "We always knew he was special," Anthony replied, embracing her. "We just never imagined how much." At the Prometheus Institute base, the morning brought significant changes. Marina coordinated the removal of the equipment, ensuring nothing remained to disturb the forest's balance. Dr. Peckham had left in the early hours, leaving behind only a note stating that he needed to reassess years of research. Sometimes, Marina reflected, as she watched her team dismantle the last device, the greatest scientific discovery is accepting that there are things beyond science. In her home at the edge of the forest, Mrs. Iris smiled as she prepared her herbs. She knew her role as guardian was coming to an end, but her heart was at peace. The forest had chosen its new protector well. When Caleb finally joined his parents for breakfast, they noticed a subtle change in him. His movements were even more graceful, and a faint golden glow danced on his skin as the sunlight touched him. "How are you feeling, son?" Helen asked, trying to keep things normal. Caleb smiled, a smile that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the forest. "Complete," he replied simply, "as if I've found a part of me that was missing." Throughout the day, the residents of Mystic Grove began to notice small changes. Flowers bloomed in more vibrant colors, birds sang sweeter melodies, and the air seemed charged with revitalizing energy. Before leaving, Marina paid one last visit to the Myers home. She found Caleb in the garden, surrounded by butterflies and hummingbirds that danced around him. "I came to say goodbye," she said, "and to apologize." "There's no need," Caleb replied gently. "You understood what really mattered in the end." "What will happen now?" she asked, watching as the plants seemed to lean toward him. "The forest will continue to grow, to live, protecting those who protect it," he answered, "as it always has, as it always will." That night, as the full moon bathed Mystic Grove in silvery light, Caleb walked to the edge of the forest. His parents watched from the porch, not with worry but with pride and understanding. Mrs. Iris waited at the same spot where it all began. "Are you ready for your first official night as a guardian?" she asked, a smile in her voice. Caleb nodded, feeling the power of the eye of the forest pulsing in harmony with his heart. Together they walked into the woods, where the trees bowed gently in their path, and the animals emerged from the shadows to greet him. The forest had its guardian, and the guardian had found his true purpose. In Mystic Grove, the stories of the boy who spoke with the trees would become legends, told from generation to generation, reminding everyone that true strength lies not in controlling nature, but in being part of it. The end, dear listeners. Caleb's journey shows us that true magic lies in embracing who we are and finding our place in the world. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to join our community of storytellers. We've prepared a special playlist featuring equally engaging narratives about extraordinary people who found their path in surprising ways. You can find it by clicking the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire and transform. Every day we bring new narratives that explore the hidden magic in everyday life. Share your own story of discovery and transformation in the comments. After all, each of us has a little bit of Caleb, seeking our own connection with the world around us.